by the way in which this story is stepping on the president's agenda.
Michael Waldman, some background to fill in for you on our viewers' behalf. Number one, you are a veteran of the Clinton White House staff, the speechwriting shop there. Number two, the Brennan Center is named and set up in the memory of the great Justice Brennan, the liberal lion appointed by Eisenhower. Eisenhower always called him the biggest surprise of his presidency. But you guys, among other things, study voter fraud. If you knew of 50,000, 10,000, 5,000 cases, I assume you would have long ago gotten up on your soapbox and waved your arms and told us about this. What is the evidence of voter fraud in this country?
Well, election integrity, Brian, is extraordinarily important, but our studies and every study by every scholar and news media and everybody who's looked at it has found that you are more likely in this country to be hit by lightning than to commit in-person voter impersonation. And the idea that 3 to 5 million people were illegally voting 2 months ago, not 25 or 50 years ago, and nobody noticed, is transparently ludicrous. And this is not nearly as silly as who had more people on the mall over the weekend. This is the highest official in the land, someone sworn to uphold the Constitution, including the right to vote, which is in the Constitution, peddling fake about a very basic aspect of our democracy. And I've looked at the history of this issue, and I really can't think of anything remotely like it. It's disturbing. And, you know, Václav Havel, the great Czech playwright and dissident and eventually leader, he said that when people in power lie about something that's easily disprovable, the message in part is that we can lie about anything and those facts don't matter. Right. And as your other guests have said, in some ways that's among the most disturbing things of all.
And Margaret, I watched the guests on cable news all evening with great interest, because here's the story that's developing. Starting in last night's Washington Post, the notion of turf wars on day 2 and 3 of this White House. Vanity Fair, quoting a friend of the family, reminding everyone Jared Kushner was, as an Orthodox Jew, observing Shabbat on Saturday during the disaster and therefore was not working that day. The Post reporting that people have been alarmed at the sharpness of Kushner's elbows, the man about whom Donald Trump said if he can't get to peace in the Middle East, no one can. Just on and on. Tom Barrack, friend of Donald Trump, saying on CNN tonight that his friend the president was inundated by work and used to dealing in colloquialisms. And this is interesting because obviously the press secretary came out again today, if not ordered to say something, certainly with a mind to say what he did.
Yeah, and you have to remember, this is a combination of a really old team, well, not really old, but an old team that goes back several months, and a fairly new team in terms of the kind of the RNC operation that's come together. And then there's the family team, which is probably the strongest bond of all. So I think these sort of palace intrigue observations are, on the one hand, completely obvious. You could have seen that coming for, you know, since November the 8th, but also really interesting to watch play out. And when you look at the seating chart for the presidential advisors swing in this past Sunday, it was those 4 people who really matter and may be jostling against one another at different levels. Steve Bannon, Reince Priebus, Kellyanne Conway, and of course Jared Kushner sharing that row together. So the strategies for how to respond to these issues, who's in the room, what they know, this is all stuff that if you're a reporter and you're covering the White House, you really want to understand, but these patterns are just emerging.
And Charlie, we're talking about full working day 3 tomorrow of this administration. How long can it be until we hear or read the name David Gergen, the fixer? It would be his 5th president, lifelong Republican, but also worked for Bill Clinton. He's a patriot, and he has stature and standing. Do you think a pro from Dover will eventually be called in?
I don't know. I mean, is there going to be a grown-up in the White House? Is there room for a grown-up in the White House? I don't know. I mean, you mentioned this is day 4. Do you realize how much stuff this administration is doing? I'm trying to imagine what it must be like to be Reince Priebus right now.
Question.
They are doing so much stuff.
It's a packed agenda.
It is a packed agenda, and yet what we're talking about is this an administration we will ever be able to believe about anything. And there's a reason why you take care of your credibility, why you husband it, because there will be a time when it will matter that the President of the United States' word, be believed. And they are squandering this. They are not only stepping on and destroying their own agenda. I mean, this is a week in which he is fulfilling many of his, central campaign promises. And yet, what are they doing? This is completely self-inflicted. He won the election. Why are we even talking about this unless you have this White House that is completely out of control? And the problem is, it's not Steve Bannon, it's Donald Trump. So would Donald Trump listen to David Gergen? Does Donald Trump listen to anyone at this moment?
Michael Waldman, take off your Brennan Center hat and just put on your veteran of a White House staff hat. What jumps out at you when you look at how this place is or not?
Well, David Gergen, I worked with him, and he would be an addition to any White House. But bringing in and layering on another person doesn't really solve these things. So first of all, this isn't the first time a president has had this kind of thing, but just not so early. We think of LBJ had the credibility gap for lying about Vietnam. Nixon lied about Watergate and had to resign. Bill Clinton said, I did not have relations, and he got impeached. In other words, there are laws of gravity and consequences to this kind of thing that do seem like they will eventually and maybe pretty quickly affect this president. I also think that what's striking in part is that we're not just learning this from tell-all books. We're reading in real time, 3 days in, all these people leaking at each other. Usually Democrats tend to have more chaotic White Houses at the beginning because the president wants to be the center of the action, and Democrats very frequently don't pick a strong chief of staff, and Republicans are more comfortable usually with a kind of a corporate model with a strong chief of staff and maybe one or two other people. The Democrats get there eventually. Here you've got Donald Trump having run basically a fairly small family office in this company. This was not a massive, far-flung manufacturing enterprise or something. Now having 4 or 5 power centers, and it does seem to me that the centrifugal forces are pretty powerful and could make it hard. Remember, he's issuing, maybe tomorrow issues an executive order on building a wall. That doesn't mean the wall gets built tomorrow. That's a piece of paper. That's symbolism. That's a good day in the media. If you really want to do something in government, it requires relentless, organized follow-through, and it's hard to imagine that that's going to be what we see out of this White House.
That is exactly what we'll talk about in our next segment. For now, our thanks to the three of you. We'll take our first break, and when we come back, what the president is going to say tomorrow, what he's going to sign tomorrow pertaining to the border wall, and how much can he say or do here without Congress when the 11th hour continues.